On 28th July, Barbara turned 70, a sister and a friend.
So we're going to go on a journey through your gastrointestinal tract. It's about 10 metres long, so it's quite a journey, but we will cover this journey tonight. And we begin with the mouth. The mouth is the only place where we have say over what happens in our gastrointestinal tract. We have say over what goes in. We have say over when it goes in. We have say over how often it goes in. And we have say over how long it actually stays in the mouth. And we also have say over the environment of entry. And all of those decisions, as you will see, affect the whole of the gastrointestinal tract. Notice in our mouth, it's the only place we have exposed bone, and that's our teeth. And our teeth are designed to chew, chew, chew. Now, as we've been looking at this week, the mouth was not designed to breathe. It's been designed to talk, to laugh, to sing, to kiss, to chew. And chewing the food very, very well means that we break the food down to tiny little particles, and that gives a larger surface area for the enzymes to work on. But something else, when we chew very, very well, it gives an opportunity for the brain to assess what is in there. And so now it can say to the liver, we've got a bit of fat coming, stomach, we've got a bit of protein coming, pancreas. It gives messages so that these organs get ready for these foods. But when the person goes chew, chew, swallow, chew, chew, swallow, chew, chew, swallow, the organs are saying, what's coming? And the brain says, I don't know. They're chewing far too fast. So it's very important to take note on the only part of your gastrointestinal tract that you have say over, which is mouth. The mouth is an alkaline environment. And there are a couple of foods where digestion begins in the mouth. Underneath the tongue, there are sublingual glands that release lingual lipase. And lingual lipase is an enzyme that breaks down saturated fat. That's the only fat that it breaks down, is saturated fat. So your saturated fat is found in coconut. There is a little bit found in macadamias and avocado. Butter is a saturated fat. Palm oil, shea butter, these are all saturated fats. And they are unique in that the breakdown begins. It begins in the mouth under the action of lingual lipase, which is released from the sublingual glands under the tongue. The other food that is broken down, or that begins the breakdown, is starch, or you could say carbohydrates. So these are all your pastas, breads, cereals. The breakdown begins in the mouth, and it begins in the mouth under the action of salivary amylase. And that salivary amylase is called ptyalin. Ptyalin is the enzyme that begins the starch breakdown. But the ptyalin in the mouth is not present until the molars come through. So the first teeth that human beings get are 4 at the top, 4 at the bottom. And they appear anywhere between usually about 7 to 10, 11 months of age. Now those 8 teeth are called milk teeth. And the reason they're called milk teeth, because that's all baby should be having. That's baby's main food, is milk. But it's also taste time. There should be 3 things present for a baby to be able to be introduced to food. Number 1 is they can sit. And they usually sit about 7.5 to 8 months. Number 2, they can pick up the food and feed themselves. Number 3, They have teeth. How often are mothers told to give their babies cereal at 6 months of age? They can't sit. They can put things in their mouth, and by the way, they put anything in their mouth. And so the food is mashed up because at 6 months, many babies have no teeth. And it makes absolutely no sense. In fact, there are dentists that are saying it's the worst thing you can do for the development of your teeth and gum is to give a baby, sorry, but I don't know how else to call it, slop. I don't know about you, but I'm not interested in lying down and being fed slop. No? It makes no reason at all. And yet, there are no enzymes in the mouth to break down that cereal. Some claim that the baby must have some iron in the second 6 months because breast milk doesn't have as much iron in the second 6 months as the first 6 months. Well, I have a question here. Does God make mistakes? No, of course, God never makes mistakes. And did you know that the baby's requirements for iron in the first 6 months are greater than in the second 6 months? And so many mothers start to give their babies food then because that's what they are told. Let's have a look traditionally. Babies were never fed food until they had teeth and they could sit and they could eat. In many cultures, babies were not given food till they were nearly 2. You see, when the next teeth come through, these are the molars and these are the grinders. And what do we grind? Grain. And when the molars are fully through, then ptyalin is released in the mouth. And so babies should have no starch until the molars are through. This is very important information for medical missionaries to have to share with mothers. So what can baby be given until then? I just used to give my babies a carrot stick or a celery stick or a piece of cucumber or a piece of apple because it's very important for their development of the teeth and the gums that they have hard food that they can chew. And you'll find, remember it's taste time, you give the baby a piece of cucumber at mealtime, keeps them busy so you can eat your meal, and they think they're doing what you're doing. And you'll find they'll nibble away at that cucumber and there'll be bits of cucumber all over their tray and there'll be little bits of cucumber on the floor and a few bits of cucumber go in and they come out the other end much the same, and that's perfectly fine because it's taste time. It's preparing them for the time when the molars are through and they will start chewing. Many health problems develop in human beings' guts because they were given food too young. They were given food that they could not digest. There's a little valve here, and it's a double-layered valve, and it's called the cardiac sphincter because of its nearness to the heart muscle. And the cardiac sphincter is a double-layered sphincter, and it is designed to prevent acid coming up into the esophagus. Because if the acid comes up there, it has the potential to irritate and even cause ulcers in the esophagus. So we're now moving down to the stomach, and the entry into the stomach is this little valve called the pyloric sphincter. The pH of the stomach is acid. And there's a very important reason for that acid. So really, the craziest thing that anyone can ever be given is antacids. Anything that will block the production of the acid, because the acid is vital for the breaking down of protein. Why would someone be given something to block the acid? Because the acid keeps coming up and causing terrible discomfort. It's called reflux or heartburn. The reason for reflux or heartburn is not the odd time a person might eat it late, but every night, a late evening meal, and then they lie down and gravity pushes that food in the stomach up against that pyloric sphincter. So night after night after night after week after month after year, it weakens. it starts to weaken that little sphincter. It weakens it to the point where the acid can start coming up into the esophagus. You see, gravity insists that when we eat, we be upright. And we should remain upright until that stomach is empty. When we go to sleep at night, our whole body is resting. And it's unfair to expect the stomach to be working hard while the rest of the body is at rest. But when a person has a large evening meal at night and they go to sleep, yes, it presses against that cardiac sphincter, but it also does not digest very quickly because everything slows down. And it's not unusual for that person to wake up in the morning and have no desire for breakfast because there are still remnants of that meal that they ate last night. So how can we strengthen the cardiac sphincter and so recover from reflux? Take magnesium, because this little muscle, it looks like this. It's a muscle, and when it's relaxed, it's closed. And when it tightens, why would it tighten? With stress. When it tightens, it opens. Another thing that causes it to open is when we start chewing, and this peristalsis starts happening, and the muscles start cramping, and then that cardiac sphincter opens, allowing the food to go into the stomach. And so the mineral that is a muscle relaxant is magnesium. So magnesium can be taken to relax the cardiac sphincter. So to recover from reflux, have breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, and nothing at night. If you have anything at night, maybe a bowl of soup, or maybe a vegetable juice, but something very light, or maybe a banana, which digests very quickly. And also making sure you're well hydrated. Hydration is necessary for the enzymes in the stomach to be made. We now enter into the stomach, which is an acid environment. The lining of the stomach looks like this, and there are glands that line the lining of the stomach. And 2/3 of these glands produce mucus. And that mucus is designed to protect the stomach lining from the acid, because down in these little cells here, hydrochloric acid is released. And hydrochloric acid, if it were to touch your skin, it would burn a hole in your skin. So God designed, in his ultimate wisdom, this thick mucosa wall that lines the stomach. But from these cells here are released the enzymes that break down the protein. So one is hydrochloric acid, another one is pepsinogen. And pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid unite and release pepsin. And pepsin is the enzyme that begins the breakdown of protein. That's the only thing that is broken down in the stomach. The starch digestion slows down, even though it began in the mouth. It slows down when it hits this acid environment. But as we will see as we go further on, it revives again when we get to another part of the gut, which is alkaline. When someone is drinking with their meals, they dilute the stomach acid. And when the acidity of the stomach is diluted, hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen cannot connect. And even if some pepsin is produced, pepsin can only be activated in a very acid environment. So what happens with a lot of people with reflux? The antacids happen, and we've got food now sitting in the stomach, unable to be broken down effectively. It starts to ferment, and then the fumes come up, and that can also add to the discomfort of reflux. So what would delete or what would compromise hydrochloric acid or the production of hydrochloric acid. Eating all day long, drinking with the meals, eating the largest meal at the end of the day, stress, being very stressed out. All of these things bit by bit contribute to a depletion of the hydrochloric acid. The research shows that with many people, hydrochloric acid depletes as people age, but there is no need for that to happen. It depletes with age because of their lifestyle habits. And it's so common that the research basically says this is going to happen, but not so. So how can you boost hydrochloric acid levels? Eat breakfast like a king. Chew very, very well. When you chew very well, you make it so much easier on the rest of the gastrointestinal tract. Chew very, very well. Drink between meals, not with meals. Have most of your food at breakfast and lunch. Something else is released in these little glands called the parietal glands, and that is the intrinsic factor. And the intrinsic factor is required to be able to digest vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is linked in food with an R protein. Hydrochloric acid releases the R protein from B12, and the parietal glands release the intrinsic factor. Say this is the intrinsic factor. So B12 and the intrinsic factor, they float together all the way down the small intestine till they get to the ileum, the last part of the small intestine. And what happens then is the intrinsic factor and the B12 connect, and they're absorbed into the enterohepatic circulation, which is a circulatory system that keeps the B12 in motion, and it's just accessed when it's needed. So most people with B12 deficiency, it's because they lack hydrochloric acid to release the R protein. And if they lack hydrochloric acid, it's quite common that they will also lack the intrinsic factor. Why would that be? Eating all day long, eating the largest meal at the end of the day, drinking with their meals, stressing while they're eating. In fact, I love from the writings of Ellen White where she says, cast off care and anxious thought when you sit to dine. That's an important point. No controversial issues are to be discussed at the evening meal. Well, we're not having an evening meal, at the dinner table, because that can have quite a devastating effect on the digestion of everyone who's sitting at the table. You can laugh, you can sing, although it's a bit hard to sing while you're eating, but keep it a happy time at the table. And so, as you can see, the only digestion that happens in the stomach is protein. And now we're moving down through a little gate at the end of the stomach called the pyloric sphincter. And we move through the pyloric sphincter into the first part of the small intestine. The pyloric sphincter, when we wake up in the morning, especially if we went to bed with no food in our stomach, it lays open. So warm water in the morning is the best to help every cell in the body with its water requirements. But when we smell food, think food, the pyloric sphincter shuts. And the food comes in, and the pyloric sphincter stays shut. It seems that the pyloric sphincter has little sensors. And when it senses that the food is broken down to a certain state, then the pyloric sphincter will open and little by little let the food go. If someone has low hydrochloric acid, then the food's not getting broken down at the rate that it should be, so pyloric sphincter stays shut. That's why one sign that someone has low hydrochloric acid is they feel like they've just eaten a meal and they ate the meal 5 hours ago. And sometimes bloating because the food's not getting broken down, it begins to ferment. Now there's a lot happening in the first part of the small intestine. In the first part of the small intestine, you'll see that the liver sits under your right rib. Underneath the liver is the gallbladder, and the gallbladder is a reservoir for bile. The bile is made in the liver, and the gallbladder basically just holds it. It's a holding station for bile. And you can see that the common bile duct comes down, connects with the neck of the pancreas. So let's have a look first at the liver, because there's a lot happening in the duodenum. In the duodenum, it now becomes an alkaline environment. And liver releases bile, and bile is the enzyme that breaks down the polyunsaturated fats. Remember where the saturated fats were broken down? They started in the mouth. But the polyunsaturated fats, which many vegetarian or plant-based fats are polyunsaturated fats. All your nuts and your seeds are predominantly polyunsaturated fat. And so the bile emulsifies the fat or breaks it down into tiny particles. So what's also happening in the duodenum is the pancreas. The pancreas releases sodium bicarbonate to ensure that the duodenum stays alkaline. So the sodium bicarbonate is not involved in digestion, but it's released to ensure that it's alkaline here, because as you can imagine, when the food's coming out of the stomach, it's mixed with the acid pepsin. So the pancreas, it releases a few things. It releases pancreatic lipase. Now remember what lipase is? Lipase is the enzyme that breaks down fats. So pancreatic lipase further breaks down the polyunsaturated fats. The bile emulsifies it, and the pancreatic lipase further breaks the fats down. The pancreas also releases pancreatic amylase. Pancreatic amylase finalizes the starch digestion. Now, do you remember starch digestion? It began in the mouth under the action of the salivary amylase, ptyalin. And now, remember, it was starch digestion began, but it was put on hold in the acid environment of the stomach. And now we're in the alkaline environment of the duodenum, and pancreatic amylase is released, which finalizes the starch digestion. The pancreas also releases trypsin. And trypsin is an enzyme that finalizes protein digestion. So the pancreas doesn't just release the sodium bicarbonate to neutralize the stomach acid. It releases pancreatic lipase to break down the polyunsaturated fat after it was emulsified by the bile. Pancreas also releases pancreatic amylase, the enzyme that finalizes starch digestion. Pancreas releases trypsin, which is an enzyme that finalizes protein, but it also releases chymotrypsin. So it releases two different types of trypsins to finalize protein digestion. So students, I have a question for you. Which organ of the gastrointestinal tract is the main organ of digestion? The pancreas. Before I studied this, I thought everything got digested in the stomach. But it is not so. In fact, some digestion even begins in the mouth. And this explains why, if someone has pancreatic cancer, a compromised pancreas, they often die very quickly of malnutrition. Can you see why? Because the pancreas is not working properly, it can't finalize digestion, and if you can't finalize digestion, the nutrients can't get out of the gut and into the blood, and thus to the cell, so the person dies of malnutrition. I've got some good news. It's not going to get any more complicated than this. Now, the enzymes that break down protein are called proteolytic enzymes. So let's have a look at what the proteolytic enzymes are. One proteolytic enzyme is pepsin, because it breaks down protein. The other proteolytic enzymes are trypsin and chymotrypsin. So we'll just say the trypsins, the family of trypsins. But God, in His goodness and mercy, has put some proteolytic enzymes in some foods. One is called bromelain, and that comes from the core of the pineapple. I was recently staying in a house where they had pineapple for breakfast, and they cut all the edges of the pineapple and were about to throw away the core, and I went, don't throw the core away. And they said, it's hard. If you cut each slice of pineapple like that and then cut each slice in little wedges, everybody just gets a tiny little bit of the core and then the sweet flesh on the edge. So that's a lovely way to eat the pineapple, and everyone gets a little bit. It's called bromelain. Bromelain is the enzyme that is found in the core of the pineapple. And also the seed of the papaya or the pawpaw contains papain, and that is also a proteolytic enzymes. We don't advise black pepper. It is an irritant, and some people really miss their black pepper. So what you can do, you can save the seeds out of the papaya or the pawpaw, dry them and put them in your pepper grinder. They look just like pepper, and they taste a bit like it too. They're very hot. So instead of the black pepper interfering with digestion and being an irritant to the gut, all your guests putting the black pepper on, well, what they think is black pepper, will actually aid digestion. So if someone has pancreatic cancer or a compromised pancreas, the best thing they can do is take digestive aid. And most digestive aid tablets you buy, or digestive enzymes, you will find have bromelain and papain in them. If they have porcine in them, P-O-R-C-I-N-E, I do not advise that because it's enzymes from the stomach of the pig. Yes, not very nice. But you can get bromelain and papain. And now we come to the grand finale of digestion. Lining the small intestine are villi. And these villi basically look like this. And up the middle of the villi is the lacteal. That's part of the lymphatic system. And all through the villi are the little blood capillaries. So it basically looks like this. You see, our gastrointestinal tract is a hollow tube. And anything that goes into that hollow tube is not part of you or me until it gets broken down and absorbed into the blood, then it becomes part of you and me. The Bible says in Leviticus 17:11, the life of the flesh is in the blood. So the food that we eat has no use until it gets out of our gut and into the blood. My skin is an external environment because it's outside of my body. Your gastrointestinal tract is an external environment too, because anything that goes in there is not part of you till it gets out of the gut and into the blood. That's why knowing how the gastrointestinal tract works is pivotal to knowing how to access the nutrients that are in your food. How sad to spend money on organic food and to learn how to prepare it in the most healthful manner, but not be able to access the nutrients. So digestion, enhancing proper digestion, is just as important as buying good quality food and preparing it in the most healthful manner. When we were in our mother's wombs, our gut was sterile. But when we were born, we were literally showered with our mother's microorganisms. I was watching a documentary by a group of doctors talking about digestion, specifically gut flora. And the two main gut floras are called Lactobacillus acidophilus, bifidobacterium, called the healthy or the friendly bacteria. But in a baby, in utero, there is no gut flora. And there's one endocrinologist who was on this show. He said, we always thought God made a mistake when he put the anus and the birth canal so close. He said, what we have been doing for the last 50 years is if a woman comes in to have a baby, we give her an enema because we want to clean the bowel out, because we don't want anything coming out of there when this little baby's born. But he said, we now know it's a perfect design. And if you know and love God, you know it's a perfect design. When the birth canal stretches open, so does the anus. And when the baby is born, the air coming out of the anus is one of the first things a baby breathes. And that is an important part of it populating the baby's gastrointestinal tract. Because at the same time as inhaling, it's also swallowing and giving its first little murmur. They used to smack babies to make them cry. I had a lot of home births with my babies. I never allowed that. I let the babies breathe naturally. And there's no need for them to hurry up and breathe because they're still connected to you by their umbilical cord. They're still getting oxygen through there. So notice what the endocrinologist said. We now know it's a perfect design. What they have found that when babies are born via caesarean section, their gut can have skin flora in it instead of gut flora. And the first 3 days after the baby's born, the breasts release colostrum. It's a very thick substance, a thick yellowy substance, and it's rich in gut flora. And that's why a mother should never have antibiotics in pregnancy, because if she does, it will compromise her gut flora. So when her baby's born, her baby will get compromised gut flora. When I say never, I'm of course not referring to a mother that might be on death's door and an antibiotic might save a life. But the majority of women should not need to take an antibiotic in pregnancy. And so what happens now is that flora populates the gut, and it acts like a thick turf wall covering the lining of the gastrointestinal tract. That gut flora now plays a very important part in the final part of digestion. That gut flora is responsible for the final breakdown of food, particularly a release of the B vitamins. That gut flora is responsible for the absorption of the nutrients out of the gut and into the blood. This gut flora protects the blood against any harmful pathogens that may be in the gut. This gut flora nourishes. It nourishes the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, he didn't know what I have shown you here, but he said, all disease begins in the gut. So what would cause a breakdown in this gut flora? Because as you can see, it is a very important part of digestion. Antibiotics kill it off. All your statin drugs, your cholesterol lowering drugs, kill it off. Long-term painkiller use, kill it off. Refined sugar kills it off. So there are many today with a compromise in their gastrointestinal tract because of a killing off of this very important gut flora. That's why every country that I visit, when I look at their traditional food, they have a cultured food. It might be sauerkraut, it might be the sourdough bread, it might be yogurt, it might be kefir, it might be kimchi. There's a whole variety of cultured foods. And what those cultured foods do, they help to maintain good gut flora. Most of our food has been absorbed halfway down our small intestine. The only thing that's left is insoluble fibre. And that insoluble fibre, as you will see when we get to the large intestine or the colon, that insoluble fibre is very important to have a house cleaning role in the large intestine. So all that's really left by the time we get down to the end of the small intestine, which is the ileum, is the insoluble fibre. And there's a double-layered valve down here. And that double-layered valve is designed so that nothing from the colon goes back into the small intestines. Notice this little organ down the bottom, it's called the appendix. Once again, God never makes mistakes. The appendix has an important role in the functioning of the colon. The appendix is called the colon's oil can because it releases an oil that helps to lubricate the contents as it goes through the colon. Plus, the appendix releases antibacterial fluid, so that if anything coming out of the small intestine is a little bit toxic, it calms it down. Why would it be toxic? Dogs' gastrointestinal tract is 1 metre long. So when they eat meat, that when it breaks down, it putrefies, it's in and out quick. But ours is 10 metres long. So when people are eating meat in their diet, what's coming out of the small intestine can be quite toxic. The only way it's not too toxic is if the person eats a lot of vegetables with it, because vegetables ferment, and that can somewhat counteract the putrefaction process. Now let's say the person had a large meat diet and then they had some wine with it, then they finished with a bowl of ice cream. That sugar just feeds the putrefaction process. And sometimes that poor appendix overworks. And when it overworks, it gets tired and inflamed and the appendix swells. There's your appendicitis. And especially that is compounded on this refined, high sugar, high meat diet because the colon's not moving very fast because there's no fibre in all of that. And so if you get a build-up in the contents of here, and that puts more pressure on the appendix. No wonder people have appendicitis. One lady told me that her right, and as you can see by this, our appendix is on the right side near our hip. And so is a woman's ovaries, one ovary either side. And she had cysts on her ovaries, and the doctor took the ovary out. And when she woke up from the operation, he said, "Oh, while I was there, I took your appendix too, just in case." Eeh. Do you remember what Dr. Kellogg did? He did everything possible to try and avoid surgery. Everything possible, because there's so much that can be done. If someone has appendicitis, that's where you need the ice packs. You need the ice packs to get that swelling down. And the person can be given an enema. Now an enema might be just 1.5 to 2 cups of water going in, and that'll clear out this much. And then maybe 15 minutes later they have another enema, and that enema will go up a little bit further and then empty this. And usually by the 3rd, maybe 4th enema, the water gets right around here, and that empties the colon and takes pressure off. So that's two things that can be done if someone is suffering from appendicitis. Cold packs, deep breathing, remember God's LSD, long, slow, deep, always through the nose, which relaxes, because when someone's in pain, often their body, their muscles get very tight. So relax, breathe deeply, ice that appendix, and do several enemas, and often that is enough to avert the danger of a swollen appendix. And now we come into the colon. And the colon, basically, it's not part of digestion, so to speak, because all the food was digested here. So the main functions of the colon is to take water out so stools are formed. Because when the contents of the small intestine comes into the large intestine, it's mostly liquid. And so one of the functions of the colon is to take water out to form stools. So I'm going to show you now some of the things that help the colon and some of the things that certainly can interfere with colon function. So because the colon, as you can see, has many folds and many corners, a high fibre diet is important for the sweeping of the colon. But a high fibre diet is not just important for the sweeping of the colon, but also stimulating peristalsis, which is movement through the colon. So when you consider that our colon is 10 metres long, a person can be having a meal in here, and then there might be another meal just previously entering here, and after the meal, then they might evacuate that the meals 2 meals ago. As Dr. Kellogg said, 3 intakes of food a day should equal 3 evacuations a day. 2 intakes of food a day, 2 evacuations a day. When we eat a meal and the stomach starts massaging and moving that meal, that stimulates peristalsis all the way down the gastrointestinal tract. So the most natural time to evacuate is straight after a meal. One lady said to me, I don't know what's the matter with my gut. Every time I eat, I've got to go to the bathroom and I lose the meal. I said, no, you don't lose that meal. You probably lose the previous meal or the meal before that, because we've got 10 metres there. That's a long way down. And so the most natural time to go is after a meal. So there are some basic laws for the colon. And probably one of the most basic is to promptly answer nature's immediate call. Got that? When the body speaks, we must listen. There's a little muscle right at the end of the gastrointestinal tract, and that little muscle holds up the last part of the colon. It's called puborectalis. And we're very glad that it is there because it helps prevent accidents. And when you feel to go, it means that this last part of the colon has filled and there's pressure on the anus. And if you don't go, and unfortunately many people do this, they're watching a movie and they want to wait till the end of the movie. They're on a phone call and they want to wait till the end of the phone call. They're reading a book and they're just getting to an exciting part. And so they'll go when they've finished the book. Or they're in the middle of, maybe a lady's ironing a whole heap of shirts, and she'll go when she's finished ironing the shirts. Or she's digging a garden, or the man's digging. I'll go when I finish this. And there are many people that do that. When the body speaks, they think, I'll go in a minute. I just want to finish this task. And then they finish the task and they go and sit, and if you notice, nothing happens. Because what happens is, if you don't go when you get the feeling to go, that cannot stay there. because the body knows it'll cause too much pressure, which will weaken the anus. So what happens is it goes back here. And more water gets taken out. And when too much water gets taken out, then the contents goes like rabbit pellets or cement. So it's very important to promptly answer nature's immediate call. We're very glad that if the plane's allowed to land and you're not allowed to get out of your seat and you really need to go, we're very glad that you can stop it. And it's not the odd day you might do that or the odd day you don't. It's what you do every day that tells the story. So it's very important to answer nature's immediate call. What also is important is laughter. Proverbs 17:22 says, "A merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bones." I'd like to suggest that a broken spirit dries up the colon too. It's important to relax, and that relaxes the colon. I'm a colonic irrigation therapist. My teacher, she has passed now. She was in her late 80s when she taught me 25 years ago. She used to say, tight mind, tight colon. So it's important to relax for the colon. That's why laughter's good medicine. The colon also needs fibre. Your highest fibre foods are really your fruits and your vegetables. For those who've made a decision to reduce the fruit intake in their diet because maybe they are conquering cancer, or they have a yeast problem, or they are a diabetic, or they're wanting to lose weight, their fibre can come possibly more from the vegetables. So all your fruits and vegetables are very high fibre. And because one of the main functions of the colon is to take water out so stools are formed, it's important to drink adequate water. I have known people that have had constipation purely because they're not drinking enough water. We had one pathologist do our program and he said, we did studies on coffee, and you need 5 cups of water to accommodate for the dehydrating agents in 1 cup of coffee. Ooh. And when you consider that, most people today are dehydrated. And most people think that if you go once a day, that's enough. But I have met people who go once every 3 days. We had one lady that attended our program, she went once a week. That's like not emptying the garbage bin every day. How would your kitchen smell? And by the way, the body odour and the breath of that lady was most unpleasant. What's also important is exercise. Now this sounds like we're getting close to sustain me, doesn't it? A good way to sustain your colon. Exercise massages the colon. So every walk that you take, the colon is moving. If you're on the trampoline or the rebounder, every jump you take is massaging the colon. Your Pilates or core strengthening type exercise, they're massaging the colon. Exercise tones and strengthens the colon. But exercise also increases blood supply to the colon. So exercise is important for proper colon health. One more is position. So what do I mean by position? Let me show you. So we have here the throne, and we have a person sitting on the throne for their morning evacuation. And when a person sits on the throne, like thus, then this little muscle, puborectalis, remains taut. But if the person sits on the throne, and in the front of the throne is a little stool, so that when they sit on the throne, they're in the squatting position, puborectalis opens. And when puborectalis opens, then the colon is able to open up and the contents pass with much greater ease. And in many cultures today, they still practice squatting. I've been in different parts of Africa. I have been in Singapore, in India, and I have seen some toilets, it's a hole in the ground. When I stayed in New Delhi the night before I flew out, I stayed in a four-storey apartment with a family, and it was very beautiful. It had a lot of pink marble, and when they showed me my bathroom, it was all beautifully tiled, but it was just a hole in the ground. And of course, with a hole, you squat. It's the most natural way to do the daily evacuation, and science now shows that it's because of this muscle, puborectalis. And when you squat, it relaxes so you can pass with greater ease. It also takes all the pressure off the anus. Now let's say someone's sitting on their throne for their daily evacuation and they're a bit concerned because they didn't go yesterday, so they strain. It's the worst thing you can do because all the pressure goes on the anus. And then what happens is hemorrhoids happen. And they're incredibly uncomfortable and even painful. But when you squat, there is actually no need to strain at all because the whole body opens and it takes pressure off the anus. So it's a great way to prevent hemorrhoids, and it's a great way to help heal from having hemorrhoids. In Australia, you can buy Squatty Potty, which is like a little stool that wraps around the toilet, or you can buy just a little plastic stool to sit in front of the toilet. But it's a great tool to have to help with colon health. I think we will call a break now, and after the break, when we come back, I'm going to have a look at how you can heal from constipation. I'm going to look at how you can heal from irritable bowel and Crohn's disease. And we're also looking at some of the things that you can do for the hemorrhoids. So we'll have a 5-minute break, shall we? And when we come back, we'll look at those diseases.